Apple announced last year sometime, I can't remember exactly when it was, that they'd hit 1 million podcasts. You're kind of naive to think, oh, okay, I'll create 2 episodes and suddenly I'm going to get 10,000 people listening. Of course, it doesn't work like that.
Should actual businesses start their own podcast to build their user base and use that as a marketing channel?
It provides something different to video. It provides something different to kind of written content, long form content, short form content. You know, it's just another level of communicating, isn't it?
Right guys, welcome to another episode of Startup Dynamics, where we discuss all things startups from a perspective of founder and employee. And today we've got a very special guest, James Mulvany, who's essentially a guru of all things radio, broadcasting, podcasting, and also running businesses and starting businesses and building them. You've been running business for essentially like 10 years or so.
Yeah, I was going to say the word guru. I feel like I'm too young to be a guru.
Yeah, I know. This wasn't supposed to be an insult.
But no. But like, I started out when I was 15.
Yeah.
I kind of finished, 16. I literally just turned 16. I got a PayPal account on my 16th birthday, and you have study leave, so you have you have like 2 months off when you're meant to be studying for your exams. So I finished school, and instead of studying for exams, which sounded boring, I thought, I'm going to see if I can make some money online, and that was how I started. So like, yeah.
So So surely, obviously, you saw your mate starting to get like these little jobs, like in a pub somewhere, or in a shop.
Paper rounds, or like work, like part-time roles.
What was the thing that you looked at that as like, nah, that's not for me. Like, I want to do my own thing.
I mean, I think 2 things. Like, firstly, I was really like interested in computers. I was a bit of a nerdy kid. I just like wanted to use the computer.
Yeah.
I wanted to learn how to do stuff on the computer. So I'd kind of taught myself like Photoshop, and I was starting to learn how to build websites. And I think secondly, my dad, throughout growing up, my dad had a furniture business. He was an antiques dealer. And before I was born, like, he always had like lots of different jobs. Like when he was growing up, and he worked in so many different industries doing different things. And he always said to me throughout growing up, like, going working for himself was the best decision he ever made. And I grew up sort of near London, so a lot of my friends' dads were going and working in the city, so they wouldn't be back until like 11 p.m. at night. So they wouldn't really see the kids during the week until the weekend. But he was, he had that freedom where if he wanted to come to sports day, he could come. Yeah. Or if he needed to come and pick us up because we weren't feeling well or whatever, he could just hop out and come.
That's a really interesting distinction you made, because the thing is, like, what I've seen sometimes is when your parents are entrepreneurial and you do have those late nights and everything like that, your kids usually then go like, I want to be a good dad. I want to come back at the right time. And they don't become entrepreneurs and business owners. But you had a different experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think he he worked very much because he was an antique dealer. So his working hours were generally like, during the day. He'd be at work like for not like 8 a.m. normally, and then he'd finish at like 3 or 4. So he had that freedom, I think. But he just always said it was the best thing he ever did. Best decision he ever made. So I think that was kind of probably one of the catalysts, because I kind of knew that, I don't have to go and work for someone else. That's not necessarily like a requirement. I do have the option of being freelance or working for myself. So
you didn't necessarily like fell into it. It was fairly conscious decision.
I think so. Yeah. I think also, like, he used to drag, during half term or school holidays, like, my dad always used to drag me to work, and he'd get me doing stuff, and sometimes it would be like lifting big heavy bits of furniture. It was quite like manual labour almost. Yeah. But then also he'd take me around, and I'd see him doing all these deals, and it was quite exciting. That was kind of like quite inspirational, I suppose. It was a good way to sort of learn the basics of business, which is you buy something for a lower price and then you sell it for more, which can really be applied to anything.
Yeah. But your businesses, it's not like you took over something or anything. Like, your businesses are very different from his.
Oh yeah.
It seems like for the past 10, almost 15 years, like, it's just been audio, radio, everything that. Even your businesses right now.
Yeah.
You've got radio.co, right? You've got podcast.co, so it's all distribution and hosting. And then you've got Matchmaker, which is, again, everything about audio. Like, was that your early thing that you noticed that this is where your passion lies?
Yeah, it was that really came from I was interested in. I used to like music. I was kind of like DJing, and I wanted to go into radio at one point, like when I was, maybe 17 years old. Just before I went off to university, I was looking at going to radio as a career. So I started getting work experience for radio stations. At the same time, I was still learning about the internet, building websites. I was sort of teaching myself to code at that point. So I kind of fused the two together, and I thought, well, there's this industry there, which is radio. I kind of learned a bit about behind the scenes, what goes on, how you stream audio online. And I kind of just saw an opportunity, because prior to that, I'd made money online, but it was always like basically doing freelance. So it was kind of exchanging my time for money. So I was basically saying, okay, I can design a website or a logo for you. But I wanted a business, something where I could have customers that were paying a regular monthly fee, and something that you could kind of almost create like a tangible asset, like the company itself.
At that point, when you thought of a business, what did you think that entailed? So was it still you, but it's an incorporated business as you, or did you see employees and offices?
No, I didn't see that to begin with. It was just a case of like, I want a website where I can have, different subscriptions, and I can actually effectively create a product and sell that product again and again, versus, designing a logo and being paid that one-time fee, and, then going on to finding the next bit of business. And also it was becoming, like, I had a few different clients who I was servicing their websites and things, and it just sort of was becoming, like, quite obvious that that's not really what I was that passionate about. The radio thing was an interest of mine, and I think I thought, well, I understand about how the industry works a bit, and I kind of thought, well, I can see how I can add value to providing some streaming services. So that's really how that business kind of first came around.
Why is it your passion? What is it about radio, about podcasting that you really enjoy?
That's a good question. I think I used to love listening to radio growing up. Used to like watching TV, playing computer games, but I always remember really liking the radio too. I think the difference between like radio and podcasting is radio is real time, and it's interesting because like at the start of lockdown we saw a huge hike in listeners coming through our platform. So like traffic pretty much I think it was like quadrupled overnight, and that's because obviously lots of companies throughout Europe were going into lockdown all sort of pretty much simultaneously, and people like the fact that they can listen to the radio. Yes, they can hear music on Spotify or Apple Music, but you don't get that human connection that you do with the radio. You've got someone on the other end of the line, and if you're in lockdown, you're sat around at home on your own, you want to have that kind of that thing in the background where it feels like someone else is there with you.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that's one of the reasons we saw that big spike at the beginning of kind of like March, April time last year. And I think that really illustrates why it's like it's kind of like this personal medium. It's kind of you have that connection, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why I kind of resonated with it, from an early age.
Yeah, and podcasting seems, at least from the outside, and when you look online, like what kind of questions people are asking, it feels like people think that it's too late. It's very saturated. It feels like everybody and your mother has a podcast right now.
Yeah.
Right. Is that actually the case at the moment, or is it just a misconception?
I think, of course, there's a lot of competition now. Apple announced last year sometime, I can't remember exactly when it was, that they'd hit 1 million podcasts. Obviously, out of those million, there's going to be a lot of them that haven't really, they upload, I think it's like the difficult first 8 episodes. So if you can make it past 8 episodes, it's a good thing, because there's like a huge number. I can't remember the statistic, but a lot of podcasts, they'll have like 3, 4, 5 episodes, and then people will just give up.
Yeah.
So out of those 1 million podcasts, I think there's only around 250 to 300,000 that are actually active, e.g. publishing episodes on a regular basis. So I think when you think about that number, it's not actually that competitive when you compare it to, like, if you're starting a YouTube channel, for example. Millions of YouTube channels out there, hugely competitive, or Instagram or Facebook. So the number of active podcasts is still quite a slim number compared to other mediums.
Why do you reckon is the drop-off? So from a personal point of view, I know why I dropped off quite a few times before starting Startup Dynamics, and that's, well, nobody's freaking listening.
Right, okay, yeah.
Do you reckon that is mostly what's happening, or is it the work that needs to be put in?
Yeah, I think there's a combination of things, isn't there? I think you're right. It's like if you're kind of naive to think, oh, okay, I'll create 2 episodes and suddenly I'm going to get 10,000 people listening. Of course, it doesn't work like that, unless perhaps you've got like an existing brand, you're a big celebrity or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think of course you've got to work at it, and I think people aren't prepared to put the work in quite a lot of the time. They want like this overnight fame, don't they?
Yeah.
I think as well, because you have a lot of YouTubers, a lot of Instagrams moving to podcasts, where traditionally they've done a 5-10 minute video. Now they're moving to doing an hour long speaking throughout that time, and their type of content just isn't suited for that. Because I watch a lot of YouTubers where they'll have a really funny 10-minute video that's full on, but then you sit them down for an hour and they can't really transfer into that type of thing.
Like taking like short form to long form content. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. Yeah, I mean, again, there's another question that I get asked a lot is like, how long should a podcast be? I think like Joe Rogan's episodes sometimes can be like 2 or 3 hours long. In extreme cases.
Yeah.
A lot of people say it's 20 minutes to 30 minutes is like the sweet spot, because that's someone's commute to work, or it's a workout at the gym, or...
Again, but that's probably changing with the lockdown rules right now, right? Because you're just sitting and you're listening.
Yeah, you can just have it on in the background for a couple for a while.
I imagine it's quite difficult to pin down one, because there's ones that work in 20-minute increments, and then there's the Joe Rogans of the world, and Tom Billies as well. I think he's got like Conversations with Tom or something like that. It's called 2.5 hours on average.
But kind of going back to the question of why do you think there's a drop-off? Like, I think as well, and the fact that you mentioned that like a lot of YouTubers just don't know how to translate it. I think that's part of the problem. Is sometimes people start podcasts, they don't really have a strategy. They just think, well, I'm going to start a podcast. They'll just start recording, which in some respects is great, because on the flip side, there's far too many people who will sit and think about it for too long. Oh, what should I talk about? And rather than just taking action and actually just doing it. But I think the way to approach it is really to think, okay, let's map out the first season. What topics do we want to touch on? And if it's going to be just you, then thinking about, okay, what do we need to talk about on each of these topics? Or if you're looking at getting guests in, try and identify the guests that can kind of bring value to the table, and just have a plan, as a strategy in place. Because, if you could think about not what's just going to be in like episode number 1 or 2, but then what's going to be in episode number 8 or 10, at least you've got your first series or season sort of mapped out. And again, you don't have to commit to sort of doing an episode a week, 52 weeks a year. You could easily say, let's just do 8 episodes, 10 episodes, then have a break, then come back to it in a couple of months, and maybe revise it and reiterate and try and, take on feedback from what listeners are saying, because I think that's important as well. It's like you need to ultimately remember that if you're recording a podcast, the sole reason you're doing that, or if you works with radio as well, whether you're presenting a show or you're recording a podcast, the only reason you're doing that is to entertain or to provide information for the person on the other end of that speaker or headphones. So it's not about you as the host, it's about them. And
there's an interesting thing you kind of pointed out in the very beginning of this question, is that people want to become famous, right? Now, assuming kind of we're talking about individuals that want to build a personal brand through podcasting, is that do the same rules apply to businesses, and should actual businesses start their own podcast to build their user base and use that as a marketing channel, or is it more based on personal brands?
I think it works really effectively for both. If you're a company, you can use podcasting to grow your brand, e.g. the company brand. You could also use it to grow your personal brand as a founder or an entrepreneur. I think the way you approach it obviously has to be a little bit different, because I think if you're doing it as a company, you either need a really kind of clever hook or a clever strategy, because it needs to be more like, about what your business is doing. If you're doing it as an entrepreneur, as a kind of solo founder or whatever, it's got to be a bit about your personality and your kind of stories, your mission. You know what I mean? But it's just, again, it just boils down to the fact that at the beginning, it's just time to sit there and be strategic about it, rather than just thinking, let's just make it up as we go along.
Do you think podcasts are here to stay?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think, again, it's just, what's interesting, I think, is the obviously there's this thing called Clubhouse now. I don't know if you're aware of it, which is like an audio chat
the first
room.
time that came to my mind when you said people are just sitting there and want to be part of a conversation, that like feels like a new level to radio and broadcasting, definitely.
Yeah, and then obviously Twitter, as a reaction to Clubhouse, have launched this thing called Twitter Spaces, which I haven't really... I signed up to Clubhouse, I must admit, I've not spent a lot of time on it yet. And Twitter Spaces I've not really looked at all, but they kind of... I think these companies are obviously catching on to the idea of like audio is a good sort of way to go. It provides something different to video. It provides something different to kind of written content, long form content, short form content. You know, it's just another level of communicating, isn't it?
Now, for companies as well, obviously podcast is one of the type of creative content you can do. I mean, look back at your YouTube channel. Like you started doing YouTube videos like what 10 years ago, and you know how to connect your callers in for your radio and stuff like, which is at that time was really innovative stuff, right? But you used YouTube videos. It wasn't necessarily a podcast or anything like that. You just talked about what you're good at, what you know about, right? Knowing that podcast is the popular thing to do right now. I do see a lot of companies and even personal brands like almost forcing themselves to do a podcast because that's the popular thing to do. I mean, interesting you touched on the YouTube thing. The reason I used to do that. It's quite funny as well that you've obviously gone back through the archives. It's brilliant. I always love when I go to somebody's YouTube channel, I always sort it by oldest. I want to see where you started.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great thing to do. And it's amazing because sometimes you just think, oh my God, like looking at the videos they're producing now and then how they started, it's just like there's always polar opposites. No, I think the reason I started doing that back then was this was like probably just after I moved to Manchester, like 2010, 11, around then. Because I knew that it was a good source of traffic. You know, like YouTube had become, by that point, this sort of search engine where people are going to look for how-to information. And if we could turn some of those people looking for how-to into customers, great. I think podcasts are still on the phase of getting to that level. I think there's still a sort of struggle with discovery. It's not always obvious how you can find a podcast about a certain topic. I think if you go onto Apple's podcast app, the search is terrible, I think. It's not great at all. And Google have sort of entered the market over the last couple of years where, you know, they now have podcasts showing up as part of the organic search results. Which supposedly is, I imagine Google search is going to be a little bit better than Apple's. But I still think there's kind of a way to go in terms of like, you know, obviously a lot of transcriptions occur now. So basically that audio is turned into text, which is a lot more easy for a computer to understand and draw parallels to what someone's searching for and what's then perhaps contained within the speech of that episode. So I think, you know, there's still a way to go to get to that point, but I think it's getting there slowly. And I think once that sort of search capability is more prominent, they'll become a lot more discoverable. And, you know, if you create a podcast which is there to solve a specific problem, it'll be a good marketing tool from that perspective. But currently it's still like, I think you've got to really focus on driving a lot of traffic to your podcast to get people listening, and then they become subscribers. Yeah,
definitely. I do want to touch on kind of the business and the startup side of things. Obviously it came fairly natural to you, it seems. But I imagine throughout the years, even though you had, you know, your dad, I guess, as a mentor and stuff like that, you still had your own little failures and successes and stuff like that. I want to start with a success, right? We spoke previously, and there was a time when you felt like you were absolutely smashing it, right? What was the feeling? What was the thought process once you reached that point where you're like, I think I've made it, like?
Yeah, well, I mean, the story went, I had my first sort of business, which was called Wave Streaming, which I ran when I was at university, and kind of, I launched it when I was 17, I think. And, you know, by the time I was like 18, I was like earning a living from it. You know, I was kind of, by the time I graduated uni, I was very aware that I didn't have to go and find a job working for someone else. But it wasn't, you know, it was never going to make me wealthy. But at that stage, I had taken on a couple of members of staff, and things had started to accelerate a bit because suddenly I wasn't just doing everything myself. So I was like, before I was doing literally the computer, I'd say I learned to code only kind of to a basic level. So I was like the one creating the products, I was the one doing customer support, I was the one doing sales, designing the website, you know, wearing many hats. and you kind of hold yourself back when you're in that position because you can't be good at everything, and there's only so many hours in your day, right? And back then I was working frequently till like 11 p.m. at night. I was at uni, I'd get home from nights out, I'd be like there at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning answering emails like to customers. It was crazy, so I did work really, really hard for that period, but I felt like I wasn't really getting to where I wanted to be. When I took on the first hire was someone to kind of cover the incoming inquiries, so sales and support. Second hire was then taking on a developer to sort of create products, and help, and he sort of helped accelerate that process, because suddenly I could kind of design the products. I could come up with the ideas and he would just make them happen, and he would execute it much better than I was able to with my limited programming sort of experience. So suddenly the products we were creating were better, and obviously as a result more customers were signing up, we could charge more for the products, and got the attention of AOL, who owned a bit of software called Shoutcast. So do you remember Winamp?
I do.
Do you remember Winamp?
No.
You're probably
well,
too
he's too young to remember. I remember spending hours doing the visualization, like picking up the right one, but yeah.
So AOL owned Winamp. They bought it in 99, I think, and they didn't really do much with it. And as part of Winamp, as part of that company, there was a bit of software called Shoutcast, which was basically, it still exists, it's a tool to stream online.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like the underlying technology that powered our platform, right? But we'd innovated around this and kind of almost built a layer on top of it. AOL, although they owned this software, the department that actually sort of operated it was tiny, and like they didn't really have any resources to kind of grow it. So the product manager for Shoutcast got in touch with me one day and said, "Look, hey, would you like to come and work with us?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think so." So I literally was like, "All right, I need to go and see these guys." Got on a plane to New York probably about a month later. I'd never been to New York before, so that was an awesome experience. 22, 23, something like that. And I just knew, I was like, this opportunity is fucking massive. Like, I can't ignore this. Yeah. He never said to me, "Oh, you should come and see us." I was just like, I've got to go and see them, And I remember...
What, did you literally just knock on the door like, "Hi"?
Well, no,
we still spoke on the phone.
Yeah, he got in touch, and then I was like, okay, I kind of said, "Oh, I'm going to be going over to New York, like, let me come and see you guys." And yeah, I remember sort of that age, it just being really exciting, because I went to AOL's headquarters, which were like super fancy, and I didn't really know what was going to come out of it. I just thought, this has got to be a good decision to make, because ultimately in business, I think sometimes certain opportunities, you've got to go and it's got to be face to face. There's only so much rapport you could build over email and on the phone and things, and back then you couldn't really do Zoom calls or anything like that, so it was like, yeah, I just need to go and see this guy. So I went to saw him, and I remember leaving that meeting and being sat in one of those New York sort of like yellow cabs and just thinking, God, this is going to change my life. And it really did. It was like the business, what we've kind of structured this deal where effectively they were referring us lots of customers for free. Like, we weren't paying them anything in return for us building this sort of software and innovating around their platform and helping them build the sort of the underlying software and kind of giving them feedback and stuff. So it was a great deal. So of course overnight the business went from kind of doing okay, and I had a couple of staff at that point, to then sort of growing it to a point where I think I had like maybe 10 employees, and it was turning over significant revenue by that point, and we were just getting bigger and bigger. It was growing quicker and quicker.
So what was the thought process of that time? Was that like, this is the time when I make it?
Yeah, I was like 25 maybe by that point.
Was there a thing you wanted to buy? Like, what's the... it was generating a lot of profit. Like, I had money in the bank, it was like, it was a good feeling. And I was also aware though that this deal was almost a little bit too good to be true, and it was not going to last forever and ever. So I think 2 years after we sort of struck that deal, AOL decided to sell off that part of their company, right? And
a company that bought it didn't want to work with us. So of course, we suddenly had all these customers that should be referred each sort of day, and that supply of business just like switched off overnight. And that was kind of the point where it was like, I kind of, as an entrepreneur, I remember hitting a bit of a brick wall, and it really, like, mentally it affected me. I had a bad year because I kind of was like, shit, everything I've worked for is going to come crumbling around, and I've got all these staff now, and how am I going to be able to pay them? And it just sort of sent me into a bit of a a bad place, I think, mentally. But
what kind of things did you do to get over that? To not show your employees that you have?
Yeah, you have to just sort of remain strong. I don't know. I don't think I kind of. It probably took me a year or so before I was like, right, okay, let's move on and look what's next. And that's how Radio.co came about, because I kind of was like, I think one of the things that had taught me was that before that deal, we were very much selling to industry. So we were selling to traditionally what you'd imagine to be like radio stations, right? To engineers who work within those radio stations. It was very geeky kind of technical services. But that deal referred us a lot of, I suppose, more consumers. So it was kind of like not just radio stations, but it was like brands, it was entrepreneurs, it was people who were like DJs and bands and musicians, and they weren't really that tech savvy necessarily, so they didn't understand how all of this technology worked. So I think it showed me that there was this demand for this platform which was going to be more kind of consumer focused, easier to use, and that's really how Radio.co came about. So I think,
and that still wasn't focused on podcasts at that time.
No, it's still very much live streaming radio. Yeah.
When did you start seeing the opportunity for podcasts? Because obviously, because you're so heavily into that world, surely you saw it coming.
I think I remember thinking the podcasting thing was interesting, probably back in like 2000, even before that, like maybe 2009, 2010. But I think there was not enough demand. The podcasting thing was too new then. Probably like a year or two after we launched Radio.co was when the podcasting industry started to kind of have this resurgence. And there was more and more people like tuning into podcasts, and it started to become a word that was more widely accepted. Like people on the street, if you go up to someone now downstairs and say like, "Hey, what's a podcast?" Most people know what it is. I reckon if you did that 5 years ago, even it might still been. You might get like 1 in 5 people who say, "Yeah, I know, I listen to podcasts," but a lot of people still didn't. It was a techie thing. And to begin with, it was like you had to download the file to a computer and then transfer it to your iPod. So, the advent of smartphones and sort of the more wider availability of data on smartphones as well, it means people can stream them. So that's why they've become more sort of, consumer, I think.
Can you remember the first podcast you ever got into?
No. I mean, I remember the first podcast I recorded, was probably in 2008 or 9, and my friend Steve, who I used to do quite a bit of work with, this was when I was still at university, and he was like, let's just start recording a podcast. And we used to have these meetings. So initially I used to share an office with him. This was when I lived in Huddersfield. That's where I went to university. And he then moved, he actually lived in Leeds. So then he used to come to like work in my office like once or twice a week. And I remember we just have these crazy conversations about business. And it was kind of like, let's just start recording these because it would be fun. So we created this podcast called Kickstart Profits. And annoyingly, I've tried to find on Wayback Machine if I would love to listen to these episodes. I think we did about 12 in total over a couple of years, maybe. And we just sit and
how did you distribute them at that time?
It was really clunky. So it was we had a WordPress blog, and we had a plugin for this WordPress blog, and it used to, we could then submit it to Apple or something. And so to publish the episode, you had to create a blog post, and you kind of attached a MP3 file to the blog post. So it was kind of really, rubbish, basically. It wasn't a very slick process, but I suppose because we were quite technical, it was quite doable for us.
But so I imagine, once you set your foot into that, once you trialed yourself, you saw what it could become at that point, right? Is that when you got the idea for Podcast.co as an extension of Radio.co?
Yeah, I think the idea for Podcast.co, was probably, I suppose it was knocking around my head for a few years. I think it was just when we had more and more customers coming to us asking about podcasting, can we add it into Radio.co as a feature? It seemed like it would make more sense to have it as a separate product versus just adding it as an add-on, if that makes sense.
Can I just take it back slightly, actually?
Yeah.
Because you mentioned before about going from a company with 2 people into 10 people, and that added responsibility that you have. And kind of a question for both of you, really. Yeah. Obviously, you're passionate about radio, about podcasts, so that's what you, in kind of dreaming into the future you want to go into. But do you ever dream about, I want to have 10 employees that I'm looking at? Is that ever a consideration?
Was it back then?
Yeah,
I think so. I think when I made my first couple of hires, I remember having this image in my head, like, and when I was finishing university, and I was kind of like, I should really hire someone. I remember taking that first step into actually taking on your first employee. That was scary, because you're like, you suddenly have that, you're responsible for their livelihood as well as your own. But I do remember thinking, I can't, like, I had this image in my head, and I am a firm believer actually in this, even though I'm not sort of particularly, like, I don't know, spiritual or religious or anything. I do sort of believe that if you kind of have these strong images in your head, you will naturally work towards making them happen. And I remember having this image of, like, this office that had, like, iMacs on all the desks, and like really good chairs. So we got like Herman Miller chairs, which are sort of like designer office chairs, which are quite expensive, but they last a long time. And I remember having this image in my head of having this office like that, because I'd seen other offices like that. And then, of course, like, probably like within the 3 years of sort of like having this visualization, probably kind of happened. It came to reality. But then at the same time, I just took it one step at a time. I didn't think, I want to get like 50 staff on straight away. I think you've got to kind of work towards it. And indeed, I think now we've got, I think, 32 or 33 people now. And, obviously it gets to a stage where, it's a good size, because I know everyone, by first name. But it's not too big. Whereas I think when you start getting past maybe like 50 staff, as the sort of CEO, you probably will get to a phase where you don't really know everyone by first name, or you don't, you hire people and never really speak to them. So I think it's 30 is sort of a good number at the moment.
Did you see a big difference between 5 to 10 to 30?
Yeah, you do. Because I think when you're in that sort of sweet spot of like maybe 10 people, when you've got like 5 to 10
right now, right, and it's like, it has that close, everybody's together, family type of thing, right?
That's the thing, yeah.
And, when you talk about 30, I'm trying to see 30 people in a room.
Yeah.
And like, all of a sudden, that's different type of pressure. That's people, looking at you almost like you're in the middle of the room doing a presentation of some sort.
Yeah, I think you're right. Family is the right word. When it's like, let's say between 5 and 15, maybe, I think that's when it's very much just like you're a family. Everyone knows each other. You're very like, sort of close. And I think when you start getting beyond 20, it starts to feel less like a family, I guess.
Yeah.
But then also as well, you've got to, again, it's sort of, I guess it's become a bit more kind of departmentalized over time as well. We have our development team, we have our sort of marketing and sales teams, we have our technical support and customer success team. So it's a bit more sort of split across different departments have got different responsibilities. Whereas like when it's sort of 5 or 6 of you, I think everyone's kind of got their eyes on everyone else's business a bit more, if that makes sense. So
yeah, and I feel like in much bigger companies as well, you kind of, if you're the CEO or whatever, the employees almost kind of don't see you as a human being and incapable of making mistakes. Whereas like the relationship that me and Jonas have, I know that you can come to me if you have any kind of anything you need work with, and I can come to you, and you have that relationship like a human to human.
Yeah.
It's like the CEO of like Barclays or whatever. You can't really
go and challenge him on his decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly hope that I still have a. I still hope that at this stage I definitely think hopefully I'll still get seen as a human being. But I do know what you mean. I think for corporations, the CEO is almost like this figurehead that people don't even know, and it's just this sort of. I've seen these things where they'll like try and create the CEO or create like a monthly video, and it's all so corporate. It's just a bit cringeworthy. Where they'll be like, we're working with a company at the moment on creating a podcast, because podcasting can be a great way for bigger companies to create like an internal podcast. It's a great way of doing internal comms, because people get an email in their inbox, they don't read it, or a newsletter, and it just gets thrown in the bin. So, whereas a podcast, you can get employees involved, you can kind of shine light on different things, and it can be a bit more personal. And they've got like 330,000 employees. It's like one of these companies that you've never heard of, but it's massive. 330,000 people all over the world, and it's just like.
Get them all on the podcast.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. We're trying to say, like this is a good way of you communicating with all your different offices and things. And I think even when it's at that scale, they'll have podcasts in different languages. So it won't just be like one podcast for the whole company. It will be like multiple podcasts for different territories and things. But having said that, it is a better way of communicating, and it's something that they, bigger companies should consider, I think, because it sort of adds that sort of personal way of communicating with people that perhaps just writing a letter doesn't have.
Yeah. When you had your first hires and kind of your team grew, was it hard to let go?
That's a really interesting question. I think that's what I was scared of. I remember thinking, because I'd spent sort of 5 years or so when I was younger, like going through uni and creating the business to a point where I was at this level, and I was doing everything like I mentioned before. And I remember thinking, there's no way that I could hire someone who is going to be able to fully understand how to do this role, because I couldn't really get my head around that. So I think to begin with, yes, but then I think when I realised, I put trust in the first few hires I made to perform those roles, and I realised that they were more than capable of doing those roles, and actually then realised they could probably do it better than I could, and that was a point where I was like, I could completely relinquish control.
Was that a happy moment, or was that a bit of an ego hit?
No, it was happy, I think. It probably took there was probably like a crossover period where I was kind of still, like for example, when I first hired a developer, I'd up to that stage written code, so I was kind of having to show him what I'd written and how it worked and stuff. But he was kind of like, no, this is basically, and rightly so, like, this is all totally wrong, this is garbage almost, we should throw this out and start again. And interestingly, that first hire, he's now my CTO.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, but, it was quite refreshing, because I was like, this guy knows far more than I do. And it was, it was a happy thing, I think. I
think from an employee point of view on that, I think, especially with you, I felt the most important part of the job that I had to get hang of wasn't kind of learning any skills. It's more learning exactly what you want the brand to be going forward. And like, if I saw a random person in the street, could I explain what our app is doing, how it's going to benefit people, and truly kind of get on board with the message?
That's a good point. I think as a startup, sometimes it's quite hard to, even when I first started radio.co, I had to do a lot of work in trying to actually explain what it is, like this kind of like the concept of an elevator pitch, because the previous way we'd sold and pitched the product, even though the product was kind of the same, it was very, very different. It was like more technical. I always found it incredibly difficult to explain to someone as like a layman what we actually did. With radio.co, that became suddenly really important. It had to be something that was kind of, you could go up to someone in the street and say, right, this is what it is. Or when you're on, I entered a pitch competition for early stage startups called Northern Stars, and ended up winning. But I remember I had to sort of, for this process, I had to put together this deck, go up on a stage and present it to people who were like a mix of kind of other entrepreneurs, tech investors, people who are just interested in tech and stuff. And you have to explain what your business is, what it does, what problems it solves, etc. And I remember really, really having to work on that. I think it was kind of a bit petrifying to begin with, because it was like suddenly everything. We've been working on this platform for like the year or so before that, and we brought it to market, and then it was like having something like up on the stage being judged by these people. A lot of whom, as I say, investors and things. Very experienced. It was kind of intimidating.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
But good fun at the same time, I think.
Did you ever get investment? Is that?
No, I was lucky. Like because I'd started young, I'd sort of grew the business very organically over several years. And then I had this sort of turn of fortune, I suppose, and that we had this big deal suddenly, which was giving us a lot of business and growing the company very rapidly. I would say with radio.co, it wasn't bootstrapped, because I kind of sort of self-funded it, really. I reinvested a lot of the profit I'd made from the previous incarnation into creating this platform and building a team. So I didn't have to go out and get investment. We did take on some debt financing though to build podcast.co, because that was a case of it we wanted to build a platform. We wanted to hire an entirely new team to create this, so it made sense to do that.
So you had money in the bank.
Yeah.
You had made your profit.
Yeah.
You worked hard. You earned all of that. You decided to do Radio.co, and you decided to use your own money to invest into the business.
Yeah.
Quite a few people would just keep the profits, look for an investor, you take the risk. I still want to have my money. What was the reason that you decided to invest yourself?
Okay, because firstly, I think if you have investors, suddenly you've I've heard lots of people say to me, it's almost like you're now working for someone else, you know? Yeah. That you have to answer to them, you know, they'll sometimes say it kind of takes away some of your kind of creative freedom as a founder. So I think that was probably the main reason, really. I just wanted to, maintain control and also because I believed in what I had. You know, I believed in the product I was creating, and I knew that there was a demand for it because I'd seen the demand from this sort of previous business. So it wasn't necessarily 100% foolproof. It wasn't necessarily like there was, any risk, no risk attached to it. Of course, there's risk, just like any business. But I think I knew deep down that I was really confident that this would work out. Okay,
makes sense. Now, in terms of, I imagine you are around quite a few startups, especially like early stage and stuff like that, right? Going through their journey yourself, from building multiple businesses now, if an early stage startup founder or just people involved in it are listening right now, what would you maybe point out or suggest going from an early stage startup to a legitimate, sustainable business?
Yeah, that's a good question, isn't it? Okay, I think firstly, you've got to first and foremost think about being keen on generating profit and not just squandering that money, like trying to sort of keep some money back in the bank, that's always important. So be profit centric. I think even prior to that, just have there's too many startups which are completely reliant on investment money and they don't really think about how they're going to monetize. So they're just literally launch something and think, oh yeah, we'll worry about how we monetize it later. I think if you've got a monetization strategy in place from the get-go, that's also very key from kind of go from an early stage startup to something that's kind of sustainable. And having a good understanding of the market as well, knowing that there's a demand for your product, your service. And again, I've had other products or other startups that haven't been as successful because I've either just sort of not listened to the market demand as much, or because I've not thought, okay, let's have a good monetization strategy in place from the get-go. So I've made mistakes as well. I've got other businesses that haven't done as well, because I haven't sort of focused on those things. I think that's kind of my sort of my perspective on it, really.
Yeah, because I imagine, there's quite a few startups out there that look at your Facebooks or whatever from back when, where you're not really profitable, and you won't be profitable for a long time, but you get the attention, you get the attraction, you get the eyes and everything like that. And even when they start generating money, look, most companies, the Ubers, the Airbnbs, they're not profitable at all. Right? And I think that kind of image is instilled in a lot of today's startup founders, where they do completely rely on investment. Heck, we rely on investment right now. Even though we have a monetization model, it's not one that all of a sudden you get one client and you're kind of good for one person's salary, right? It does depend on the business, but you seem to be more get a customer first, a paying customer first, and then build a company.
Yeah, I think that's. But then again, I had a platform called MCR Live, which was kind of a hybrid radio station, kind of media, a publishing company, which we launched here in Manchester. One of the reasons we created that was because we launched Radio.co about 2 years in, and we were like, okay, we haven't actually got our own radio station. Let's create one. So to begin with, we launched something called NQR FM, which was for the northern quarter, and then we thought, oh well, how can we scale this up to be something a bit more exciting? So we thought MCR Live, and I went full in on that. It was like I hired 6 team members to be part of that. We had a studio. We spent a lot on equipment. We ran that for 2 years. was a great experience. We had a lot of fun doing it, and it was useful in the early days as well because it was providing direct, real world feedback into the radio.co platform. So it helped us kind of build and continue innovating it after launch. But then 2 years in, at sort of start of 2019, I decided just to pull the plug because it was like we'd achieved growth in terms of we'd created a sort of a good following. We were getting listeners. We had eyeballs on our social media accounts, but it just wasn't generating any money. And I made the mistake because I launched it without really having a plan of how we were going to monetize it. It was just like, well, let's build this thing first, and then we'll figure it out when we get there. And we got there. We were having lots of productive meetings. Really, the idea was to try to attract sort of a headline sponsor for the project, and we were speaking to different companies, so they were like a lot of alcohol brands, that kind of thing. We just didn't. We just, for some reason, we just couldn't convert one of them into. We sent out the pitch deck so many times to try and attract this money, to attract some kind of sponsorship revenue. Just didn't quite get there. So it was just small things here and there. But ultimately, the project just got to a stage where I was like, okay, I think it's kind of maybe time to call it a day, which was really sad because
What is it like pulling the plug? Like when you feel like this is the right time? Because the thing is, like, there's two different camps, isn't it? Ones that are saying you have to persevere. Like the ones that win are the ones that go in longest, and the other ones are like, oh, it doesn't work. Scrap it, next one. Scrap it, next one, and then until something that actually sticks.
Well, I think it was tough because it was at a certain level. Like I thought, there's part of you that thinks, if you just leave this thing going for another year, then maybe we'll get there, And then there's obviously, I kind of, at that stage, we were just about launching podcast.co. So rather than, I was kind of lucky. We didn't have to sort of fire anyone or let go of anyone, or, sort of make anyone redundant. It was kind of like a case of let's reassign the team who are working on this project to do stuff for podcast.co, which kind of made sense anyway because there's only so much mental bandwidth, I think. There's only sort of so many simultaneous projects you could work on at once as an entrepreneur. And, I think it was time to focus on the podcast.co side of stuff. So that kind of made the decision a bit easier, I guess, for me. But, it also wasn't nice. It was kind of like, because you just feel like you failed. You sort of feel like, tried to do this thing, and in some respects you could say it was a success, but ultimately, it's, as an entrepreneur, you're in business for one reason, to make money, and if it's not making money, you can't just keep pouring more and more of your sort of profits into something that's making a loss,
So what's the biggest So entrepreneurship is super popular still. Right. I ask this question to everybody that I get on that's a founder or runs a business, just because. So when I came in, it was like all about Gary Vee and all about hustle, and all that stuff. And all of a sudden, all the Instagram and Twitter bios has to have entrepreneur on it or a founder on it, right? I started feeling that people are starting businesses for the wrong reasons a bit. And then a lot of people go into these mental health issues, and surprising, it's hard. What is the biggest misconceptions that you would say are about being either a founder or a business owner?
Well, I think number one, you're right, it's not that glamorous quite a lot of the time. You're not necessarily going to be like Gary Vee from the get-go. You've got to sometimes work very, very hard, and things don't always work out. Like there's still, I can't remember what the statistic is. Isn't it something like 1 in 7 companies fail within the first 2 years?
That's generous. I think there's something like a lot more ridiculous than that.
You reckon?
Yeah, but it is a number that could be demotivating, I guess.
And also, I think another misconception is, you can create a business and it doesn't have to be the next, Apple or Uber or Facebook. You can create a business that is servicing a niche market or servicing a local area and still make good money from it. You don't have to create something that's this big global organisation in order to be successful. I think that's another, another misconception. I think people think, I want to create I'm going to be the next Google or the next Facebook or the next Apple. Like, it's just, okay, it's good to aim high, but, it's the chances of you achieving that are very slim, to be completely honest.
Yeah, I think that's what we're seeing a lot now as well. With the pandemic, people being let go or being on furlough from the 25, 30k job or whatever, instead of thinking, okay, so I can make 25 to 30k just on my own
side hustle. Yeah, which I think is completely achievable. I remember in my first year of business, interestingly, I didn't know this until I actually went back and figured it out, like probably about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. So yeah, I started out in 2004, 2005. And I was like, I never actually knew how much money did I. So I was like, how much money did I make in that first year? So I went back, found my old bank statements, and literally figured it out. I was like, made 18 grand in my first year.
Yeah.
Which for a 17-year-old
perfect.
kid is pretty good, isn't it? You know, like, but at the time, I don't think I didn't know how much money I was making because I didn't I didn't understand how to like monitor it or, you know, and you didn't have things like Xero and stuff like that then. So it was just, you know, so I think, you know, just doing that. And that was, as I say, I was doing this alongside college and then university. And I was still doing other stuff in between. I wasn't literally devoting like every waking hour to this business. So, you know, and I didn't really know what I was doing to begin with either. Like, to be honest, like very much learning on the job, you know.
Yeah. So there's only a few things that I still want to ask.
Yeah.
And this is one thing that I guess you could say struggle with a bit, and I'm curious to see what your thoughts are, is, I mean, you mentioned something about like, you know, you wanted to focus on podcast.co because there's only so many projects you can work on.
Yeah.
You do have radio.co, you've got podcast.co, and recently you launched matchmaker.co, .fm. Before we get into matchmaker.fm, I have this thing of always noticing opportunities, always noticing something else I could work on, right?
Yeah.
How do you manage that? Do you manage that? Do you dip your toes into little things until you see it? Because obviously, for you to launch something that like matchmaker.fm recently, it had to be almost like a, what's there? It has to be a bit of a diversion, even though it's within the same industry. It's a different project, isn't it?
Yeah. So with Matchmaker, it was really interesting because I'm with you. You know, I used to be really bad. Like when I was at university, I remember I'd registered new domain names for different ideas like practically every week because I'd be like, oh, I'm going to do this and do this and do this and take over the world. And then,
you should look at my Google Domains account.
Yeah. Exactly. But then I think I learned over the time that actually, you know, if you've got something that starts working, you've really got to run with it, right? And you've got to try and be self-disciplined and not sort of then get too preoccupied with well, let's chase that opportunity or this opportunity. Like, let's just focus in on one thing that's working and just try and push it further and further. But then also, you know, of course, as an entrepreneur, sometimes naturally you do just think, oh, there's an opportunity here. So with Matchmaker, it started really as a marketing funnel. We were like we launched podcast.co. We were looking at different like funnels we could set up, like who's going to be wanting to start podcast. And obviously we realised there's lots of podcasts that are based around the idea of having guests on board. So we thought, okay, let's set up a couple of landing pages, one for podcasters looking for guests, and one for guests looking to be on podcasts. And we had, you know, we put a Google form on each of these pages, so it's like a really bare bones MVP almost. I don't think we even realised that at the time. I think we just thought, well, we can sell podcasting to these people. You know, it wasn't a case of like, let's build this platform. So we had these Google forms saying, give us a bit more information about the sorts of podcasts that you're looking for, etc., or the sorts of guests you're looking for. And we did pretty well. Like, we had a couple of hundred responses on these forms, and we thought, well, actually, we don't have a way of connecting these two groups of people together. Wouldn't it be cool if we did? So because we validated there was a demand there, we thought, okay, to begin with, we sat down with our designer and we said, right, let's mock up how this platform might look. And we kind of came up with the idea of it was like Tinder for podcasters, you know, because we have these two lists of people, like how can we connect them together? And we even actually designed like a kind of Tinder-style swipe left, swipe right interface, which actually never made it to the final product. But it was really interesting because, you know, we sort of mocked it up with these sort of, you know, these faces. So you kind of sort of, well, it's like this human element to it. And we thought it's pretty cool. Sat on the designs maybe for another 6 months, and then at the end of 2019, we had a junior developer who'd not long joined the company, and we thought, well, let's just give him a little sort of task of building like this into a sort of working prototype, like an MVP type platform. And launched it in February last year, really just to sort of initially to our existing customers. Because again, you know, one of the problems we were sort of faced with Matchmaker was, well, no one's going to want to sign up to it if there's no one in there, you know. So because it's a community platform, effectively, you've got to have You've got to have podcasters in there for guests to find. You've got to have guests in there for podcasters to find. So we launched it to our existing customer base. Had a bunch of them sort of sign up. So we kind of got to kind of maybe 100, 200 members pretty quickly within a few weeks. And then it was like, okay, how can we get to 1,000? So we started opening up and started to sort of do some outreach, and it's just grown and grown and grown. And I think we're just shy of 24,000 members now, which is insane considering it's about a year old.
Yeah, I think the great thing about, in hindsight, to think about, you launched in 2020 February. The fact that most podcasts are on Zoom and stuff like that, your chicken and egg problem became not geolocation restricted anymore. As a lot of podcasts before were kind of...
Chicken and egg problem, I like that, yeah. I think you're right. More people have been turning to podcasts, more people have been turning to being on podcasts, and it's become a kind of an alternative. For someone, for example, authors, right, who are looking to promote and launch a book. Traditionally, they might do newspaper interviews or magazine interviews, right? Now, authors, like a big source of promoting a book is let's get booked on podcasts, and they're sort of perfect for it because they've written a book on whatever topic it might be. So you immediately have all of these sort of bits of information, sort of like golden nuggets that you can share, which normally, as I say, would be presented in a sort of different way. But podcast is a great medium for that.
Do you think because of this lockdown and kind of the switch to Zoom and whatever online platform you're using for interviews, that's gonna transfer into when everything comes back to normal, that more interviews are gonna be done through web calls essentially, hence leading to actually more podcasts maybe being more sustainable because it is easier to do it like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. One of the options on Matchmaker is, and we designed it like this obviously way before the pandemic, was I'm available for interviews remotely or in person, okay? And you can also specify location, because obviously we thought, well, like people might want to find people in the local area who they could interview like we're doing now, face to face, because obviously you don't have to travel, etc. And I think there is a different dynamic when you're doing a face-to-face interview. I think we said just before we started this recording, for me, this is great. I've done so many podcast recordings over the past year which have been on Zoom or whatever. So it's actually really refreshing to be sat down with doing this sort of face-to-face. But I think obviously there's still lots of people who I think maybe people have realised that they don't necessarily have to be face-to-face to be a good interview, And of course you can expand your horizons much more if you're interviewing people, in different locations on the other side of the world, whatever, because you can really dial in on exactly who you want to speak to, who kind of forms part of your story as a podcaster. And likewise, as if you want to be a guest, if you're trying to promote your business or promote your book or your app or whatever it might be, again, you can dial in on exactly what podcast will match whatever it is you're trying to sort of your mission is, or your story, or what you're trying to promote.
Yeah. So, successful podcast. Top 3 things. What would you pin down from your experience?
So consistency. Making sure that you're actually uploading an episode. Every whatever it is you're being consistent about your release schedule, even if it is in blocks like in seasons. Having a good solid strategy and a plan, and coming up with a kind of good creative sort of title, and just making sure that your branding's on point and everything.
All right. Yeah. Thanks a lot for taking the risk, coming on. I really do prefer doing face-to-face, so I really appreciate you taking the time and doing this. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Follow James Mulvany literally anywhere. You're everywhere on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Instagram. Make sure you're on matchmaker.fm. We're very happy customers of that. We found quite a few guests already on there. We're using podcast.co for our distribution and hosting, so really good platforms. And we'll see you in the next episode.